The invisible shift. When a man stops begging the world to notice him. Let me tell you something that most people will never say out loud. There are men walking through life right now who are smart, talented, hardworking, and genuinely good human beings. And yet somehow the world keeps overlooking them. Not because they lack ability, not because they are invisible, but because they are unconsciously sending signals that quietly erase their presence from every room they walk into. And here is the part that might sting a little. Most of these men have absolutely no idea they're doing it. Now picture this with me. Two strangers walk into a small coffee shop on a rainy Thursday evening. Neither of them is famous. Neither of them is wearing anything expensive. Neither of them says a single word when they step through the door. But within 5 minutes, and I mean literally 5 minutes, the entire atmosphere of that coffee shop begins to tilt. The barista behind the counter finds herself making eye contact with one of them a little more often. The couple sitting by the window instinctively lowers their voices when he walks past, and when he finally places his order, something strange happens. People around him slow down, just slightly, just enough to notice if you are paying attention. The second man? He orders his coffee too. He is polite, he is friendly, he might even crack a small joke with the barista. But somehow the room does not shift for him. No one is rude to him. No one ignores him intentionally. The attention simply drifts elsewhere like smoke caught in a breeze. Now, if you are listening to this and thinking, what is the difference? What does the first man have that the second one doesn't? Then stay with me, because what I am about to share with you over the course of this audio might quietly change the trajectory of your entire life. And I am not exaggerating when I say that. The difference between those two men has almost nothing to do with money. It has almost nothing to do with physical appearance. And it certainly has nothing to do with who talks louder or who tries harder to seem confident. In fact, and this is the part that surprises most people, some of the most deeply respected men you will ever encounter are among the quietest people in any room. They do not chase attention. They do not perform confidence. They do not broadcast their accomplishments like a radio signal desperately searching for a receiver. Instead, they carry something else, something invisible but unmistakable, a certain psychological weight, a certain stillness, a certain way of moving through the world that tells everyone around them, without a single word, I know exactly who I am, and I am not here to convince you of anything. And that, my friend, is what this entire audio is about. The quiet psychology behind the men who command respect without ever asking for it. So let me ask you a question. And I want you to really sit with this one for a moment. How much of your life right now, your decisions, your habits, even the way you speak, is being shaped by the desire to be approved of by other people? I know that question might feel uncomfortable. It felt uncomfortable for me too when I first asked it honestly. Because the truth is, most of us spend years, sometimes decades, building our lives around a force we rarely examine. The force of approval, approval from your boss, approval from your friends, approval from your family, approval from people on the internet you have never even met, approval from that one person whose opinion somehow carries more weight than it should. We chase it constantly, And most of the time we do not even realize we are doing it. And here is the thing. Wanting to be liked is not a weakness. It is deeply human. We are social creatures. We are wired for connection. Nobody wakes up in the morning hoping to be rejected or misunderstood. So naturally, we develop habits that help us fit in. We agree quickly. We avoid confrontation. We make ourselves endlessly available. We soften our opinions so they do not create friction. We smile when we want to scream. We say, "Sure, no problem," when every cell in our body is whispering no. On the surface, these habits look like kindness. They look like maturity. They look like being a good person. But underneath, something quieter and far more damaging is happening. And it is this. When a man builds his entire life around keeping everyone else comfortable, the world begins to sense it. Not consciously, not with words, but psychologically. The human brain is incredibly sensitive to signals of certainty and uncertainty. When someone constantly adjusts their behavior to match the expectations of everyone around them, they send a message, a subtle but unmistakable message that says, "I am not standing on solid ground." And once that signal enters the room, the dynamic between people quietly begins to change. Let me paint a picture for you. Imagine you are sitting in a restaurant with a group of friends. Someone brings up a topic, maybe politics, maybe a life decision, maybe something as simple as where the group should go next. One of your friends immediately says, "Yeah, I think that sounds good," even though you can tell from his face that he does not fully agree. He just wants to keep the peace. He wants everyone to stay comfortable. He wants to avoid that moment of tension where someone might disagree with him. Now another friend at the table leans back, takes a breath, and says something like, "Actually, I see it differently. Here's what I think." He does not raise his voice. He does not try to dominate. He simply says what he actually believes, calmly, clearly, without apology. Now here is what is fascinating. The second friend is not always liked more, but in the vast majority of cases, he is respected more. And that reveals something deeply important about human psychology. Respect does not grow from the desperate need to be liked. It grows from the quiet ability to stand comfortably in your own position, even when that position is not the most popular one in the room. I want to be honest with you here, because I think honesty is more valuable than pretending I always had this figured out. There was a season of my life where I genuinely believed that respect was something you earned by working harder than everyone else, by being more helpful, by being the guy who always shows up, always says yes, always makes himself available, and for a while that approach seemed to work. People were friendly. People appreciated the effort. People said nice things. But that deeper sense of respect, the kind where people truly value your presence, your opinion, your time, that never fully arrived. It always felt like something was missing, like I was standing at the edge of a room full of people who liked me, but none of them quite took me seriously. And then slowly, almost painfully, I began to notice a pattern. The men who seemed to receive the deepest respect from everyone around them were not the ones trying the hardest. They were not the ones constantly proving themselves. They were not the ones running around making sure everyone was happy. They were the ones who had stopped doing all of that. They had stopped chasing approval, and something remarkable had taken its place. self-respect. When a man replaces the need for approval with genuine self-respect, the transformation is almost eerie. He does not become arrogant. He does not become cold. He does not suddenly start treating people poorly. Instead, something subtler happens. His decisions begin to come from a different place, not from what will make everyone comfortable, but from what aligns with who I actually am. He starts saying no, not aggressively, not with resentment, but calmly, simply, clearly. I cannot make that work. That does not align with what I am focused on right now. I appreciate you thinking of me, but I will have to pass. And at first, this shift can feel terrifying, because when you have spent years keeping everyone happy, the moment you start honoring your own boundaries, some people will react with confusion, some will push back, some will test you, and that is completely natural. Change makes people uncomfortable, especially people who benefited from your old patterns. But here is what happens over time. The people who genuinely respect you, they respect you even more. They see the boundary, and instead of feeling offended, they feel something else entirely. They feel trust. Because a man who knows his own limits is a man you can rely on. A man who says no when he means no is also a man whose yes actually means something. And the people who only valued your constant compliance, they slowly fade away. And that is not a loss. That is clarity. Clarity about who actually values you versus who simply valued what you were willing to give. Now let me connect this to something else. Because stopping the chase for approval is only the beginning. There is a second layer to this that most people completely miss. And it becomes visible the moment pressure enters the picture. Because you can tell a lot about someone when everything is going smoothly. But you can tell everything about someone when things go wrong. When tension appears. When someone disagrees. When a plan falls apart. When life throws something unexpected in your path. In those moments, a man reveals something far deeper than his resume or his reputation. He reveals his emotional architecture. And here is what I have observed over years of watching these dynamics play out. The men who remain calm in moments of pressure are the ones who hold a kind of power that most people underestimate. Not the loud kind of calm where someone pretends nothing bothers them. Not the cold kind of calm where someone disconnects from the situation entirely. But the real kind. The kind where a man is fully aware of what is happening, fully present in the difficulty, and still chooses not to let the situation hijack his emotional state. Think about this for a moment. Imagine you are sitting in a meeting, maybe at work, maybe with a client, maybe even just a serious conversation with someone in your personal life. Things get heated. Someone disagrees. Someone raises their voice. Someone says something that feels unfair. Now watch what happens. One person in the room immediately fires back. Their jaw tightens. Their voice sharpens. Their body language becomes defensive. They want to win the moment. They want to push their point through before anyone else can speak. But then there is someone else, someone who stays quiet for a beat, someone who takes a breath, someone who lets the tension sit in the air for just a moment, not because they are weak, but because they are choosing how to respond rather than simply reacting. And here is the thing that always fascinates me. Even if both people have equally strong opinions, the room almost always responds differently to them. The calm person appears more composed. more trustworthy, more authoritative, not because they are performing confidence, but because emotional control is interpreted by the brain as psychological strength. Calmness sends a signal that says, "This situation does not overwhelm me." And when the people around you sense that signal, consciously or not, they respond to it instinctively. They give that person more space, more attention, more respect. And this is why I believe calm men are often the hardest people to control, because emotional reactions are one of the easiest tools people use to influence each other. If someone knows what triggers your anger, your insecurity, your defensiveness, they can steer your behavior without much effort. But when a man does not react immediately, when he pauses instead of escalating, that leverage vanishes. The puppet strings go slack, and suddenly the dynamic shifts entirely. Calmness creates a gap between what happens and how you respond. And inside that gap, something extraordinary lives. Choice. Real, deliberate, conscious choice. The ability to decide how you want to show up in a difficult moment rather than being dragged into it by your own emotions. This does not mean calm men feel nothing. They experience the same frustration, the same anger, the same pressure that everyone else does. The difference is not the absence of emotion, it is the relationship with emotion. They feel it, they recognize it, but they do not let it drive. Think of it like an ocean during a storm. The surface is wild, waves crashing, wind howling, chaos everywhere. But if you dive just 20 feet below the surface, there is stillness. The water is calm, the current is steady. A man who has developed emotional control is like that ocean. The storms still come, the waves still rise. But underneath, there is a depth that remains untouched. And when people sense that depth, they respond to it in ways they cannot always explain. They trust it, they respect it, they feel safer around it. Because in a world where most people are constantly reacting to every wave on the surface, a man who moves from that deeper place becomes something rare, something magnetic, something the world does not quite know how to shake. The quiet power of no. Why protecting your time changes everything. Now let me share something with you that sounds almost too simple to be important. But I promise you, once you truly understand this, it will change the way you move through every relationship, every workplace, and every conversation for the rest of your life. There is a single word that quietly determines the shape of a man's entire existence. It is not a complicated word. Children learn it before they can even form full sentences. And yet, somehow, it becomes one of the most difficult words for grown men to use with honesty and without guilt. That word is no. Now, I know what you might be thinking. Come on, saying no is not that deep. Everyone knows how to say no. And technically, you are right. Everyone knows the word. But knowing the word and actually living by it, calmly, clearly, without drowning in guilt afterward, those are two very different things. And the gap between them is where most men quietly lose control of their own lives. Let me explain what I mean by that, because this is important. Think about how most of us were raised. From a very young age, we were taught to be helpful, to be polite, to be the kind of person other people can count on. And those are beautiful values. Truly, there is nothing wrong with being generous. There is nothing wrong with showing up for the people you care about. But somewhere along the way, something shifts. A habit forms that feels responsible and kind on the outside, but slowly starts eroding something essential on the inside. The habit is this: saying yes to everything because saying no feels selfish. Someone asks for your help on a project. You say yes, even though your own work is piling up. A friend invites you to something you genuinely do not want to attend. You say yes because you do not want to seem distant. A family member makes a request that cuts directly into the time you had set aside for yourself. You say yes because the guilt of refusing feels worse than the exhaustion of agreeing, and each individual yes seems harmless. Each one seems like the right thing to do. But here is what nobody tells you about this pattern. Every time you say yes to something that does not align with your priorities, you're also saying no to something that does. You just do not see it happening in the moment, because the thing you are sacrificing is invisible. It is your energy, your focus, your peace, your progress, your own life quietly being rearranged to fit everyone else's blueprint. Over time, a man who never says no teaches the world something dangerous about himself. He teaches the world that his time is always negotiable, that his boundaries are always flexible, that his priorities can always be rearranged if someone else's needs appear urgent enough. And here is the part that makes this even more complicated. People do not necessarily mean to take advantage of this. Most of the time, they are not even aware it is happening. The human mind simply adjusts to the signals it receives. If someone always agrees, others begin to expect agreement. If someone always makes space, others begin to assume that space will always be there. It is not cruelty. It is psychology. The world treats you exactly the way you train it to treat you. Now let me take this a step further, because it is not just the inability to say no that creates problems. It is what many people do instead of saying no. They explain. They over-explain. They justify. They apologize. They wrap their refusal in so many layers of cushioning that the actual boundary gets buried underneath. You know exactly what this sounds like. I am really sorry. I just have so much going on this week. Otherwise, I would totally be there. I wish I could help, but things are kind of crazy right now. You know how it is. I would love to, but let me check my schedule and get back to you. And then they never get back because they were hoping the other person would just forget. Now, the intention behind this is completely understandable. Nobody wants to hurt someone's feelings. Nobody wants to be seen as cold or uncooperative. So we soften the refusal. We explain ourselves. We give reasons. We provide evidence for why our no is justified, as if we are standing in a courtroom defending our right to have priorities. But psychologically, something subtle and damaging happens when a man constantly feels the need to justify his boundaries. It sends a signal, and the signal is this: my decision is not final. If you push hard enough, if you present a good enough argument, I might change my mind. In other words, the over-explanation transforms a boundary into a negotiation. Now compare that with a man who has learned to set boundaries simply and calmly. He does not deliver a speech. He does not provide a list of reasons. He simply says something like, "I will not be able to do that," or "that does not work for me," or even just, "No, but thank you for thinking of me." There is no anger in his voice. There is no coldness. There is no guilt-driven apology for daring to have a life of his own. Just clarity. Clean, simple, unapologetic clarity. And that clarity sends one of the most powerful psychological signals a human being can project. It says, I know what matters to me, and I am comfortable with that. When a man communicates this, not with arrogance, not with hostility, but with calm certainty, the people around him begin to shift their behavior. Requests become more thoughtful. Conversations become more respectful. And something beautiful begins to happen inside the man himself. His life gets quieter. His mind gets clearer. His energy starts flowing toward the things that actually matter to him, instead of being scattered across 100 obligations he never truly chose. I want to share something personal here, because I think it matters. There was a time in my life when saying no felt almost physically painful, not because the requests were unreasonable, but because the guilt that followed a refusal felt heavier than the exhaustion of saying yes. I would lie awake at night, replaying conversations, wondering if I had disappointed someone, wondering if they thought less of me, wondering if I had damaged a relationship by simply protecting my own time. And then something shifted, slowly, gradually. I began to notice which people in my life reacted to my boundaries and how they reacted. The people who genuinely cared about me, they understood. They did not push back. They did not guilt-trip me. In fact, some of them respected me more after I started setting limits, because they could see that my yes actually meant something now. It was no longer an automatic response. It was a choice, a deliberate, conscious, meaningful choice. And the people who reacted negatively, the ones who got frustrated or distant when I said no, over time, it became clear that those were the people who benefited the most from the absence of my boundaries. They were not upset because I hurt them. They were upset because the dynamic had changed, and the old dynamic had been working very well for them. That realization was one of the most clarifying moments of my life, because it taught me something I will never forget. Setting boundaries does not destroy healthy relationships. It reveals the ones that were never healthy to begin with. Now, I want to connect this to something broader, because the ability to say no does not just change your relationships. It changes something even more fundamental. It changes how the world perceives your value. Think about this principle for a moment. In almost every area of life, scarcity creates value. A restaurant with a 3-month waiting list feels more desirable than one with empty tables every night. A limited edition book feels more precious than one printed by the millions. An opportunity that appears once feels more urgent than one that is always available. Time works exactly the same way. When a man gives unlimited access to his time and energy, when he responds to every message instantly, when he rearranges his schedule for every request, when he is always available, something counterintuitive happens. His presence begins to feel common, not because he is less valuable as a person, but because the human mind instinctively assigns greater worth to things that are limited. This is not a trick. This is not a game. This is simply how psychology works, and understanding it can transform the way you live. A man who protects his time does not become cold. He does not become distant or unapproachable. He simply becomes intentional. He chooses when to give his attention. He chooses which invitations to accept. He chooses where his energy goes and where it does not. And because of that intentionality, his presence begins to carry weight. When he shows up, it means something. When he gives you his time, it feels valuable. When he says yes, you know he actually means it. Now let me expand this idea into a territory that many people find uncomfortable to talk about. Emotional availability. Because it is not just your schedule that can become overextended, it is your emotional energy. And this is something that catches a lot of good-hearted men off guard. Here is what often happens. A man who is naturally empathetic, someone who genuinely cares about the people around him, slowly becomes the emotional anchor for everyone in his life. Friends call him when they are stressed. Family members lean on him during difficult times. Colleagues come to him when things get complicated at work. And at first, this feels meaningful. It feels like purpose. It feels like he is playing an important role. But when emotional availability becomes unlimited, when there is no boundary, no filter, no moment where the man says, "I need to recharge right now," something begins to break down, not in the relationships, in the man himself. He starts to feel drained. His patience thins. His own emotions get pushed to the bottom of the list because there is always someone else who needs him first. His role in relationships slowly shifts from equal partner to constant provider. And that imbalance over time creates quiet resentment, exhaustion, and a loss of identity. I have seen this pattern more times than I can count, and it is one of the most painful cycles a man can fall into, because it disguises itself as virtue. It hides behind the mask of being the strong one or the reliable one. And it takes genuine courage to look at that mask and say, "I am allowed to have limits too." High-value men understand something about emotional energy that most people learn far too late. Empathy without boundaries is self-destruction wearing a noble disguise. You can care deeply about people and still protect your inner world. You can be supportive and still recognize when your own tank is empty. You can show up for the people you love without disappearing from your own life in the process. This is not selfishness. This is sustainability. And without it, even the strongest man eventually burns out. Let me bring this back to the bigger picture now, because everything we are talking about, saying no, protecting your time, setting emotional boundaries, all of it leads to one simple but transformative outcome. Your life starts to feel like yours again. Instead of waking up every morning and reacting to whatever the world throws at you, messages, requests, demands, expectations, you begin to wake up with a sense of direction. You know what matters. You know what does not. You know where your energy belongs, and you know where it is being wasted. That shift does not require becoming a different person. It does not require becoming cold, distant, or selfish. It simply requires one decision. The decision to stop treating your own time and energy as the least important thing in the room. Because here is the truth that no one likes to say out loud. You cannot build a meaningful life on a foundation of constant self-sacrifice. You cannot pour from a cup that is always empty. And you cannot earn respect by being the person who is always available, always agreeable, always ready to rearrange their entire existence for someone else's convenience. Respect, real, lasting respect, comes from something much quieter than that. It comes from a man who knows his own worth. a man who protects his priorities not out of ego, but out of clarity, a man who says no without guilt, gives his yes with intention, and treats his own time as something genuinely valuable. And when a man starts living that way, honestly, consistently, without apology, the world does not push back. It adjusts. It rises to meet him, because people instinctively respect what is treated with care, including a man who has finally learned to treat himself that way. Now, in the next section, we are going to explore something that might surprise you, a form of confidence that does not look the way most people expect confidence to look. It is not loud. It is not flashy. It does not announce itself when it walks into a room. In fact, it often belongs to the quietest person at the table, and yet somehow, when that person finally speaks, everyone stops and listens. This is the strange magnetic power of men who have stopped needing the world to validate them. And understanding it might change the way you carry yourself for the rest of your life. The quiet gravity. Why the most powerful men speak the least and pause the longest. There is a kind of confidence that almost everyone recognizes instantly. It walks into a room like a thunderstorm. It talks fast. It talks loud. It dominates conversations. It interrupts. It makes sure that every single person within earshot knows exactly how successful, how knowledgeable, how important the person behind it is. And honestly, that kind of confidence can be impressive for about 5 minutes, maybe 10 if the person is charming enough. But eventually, something starts to feel off. The energy becomes exhausting. The words start to blur together, and the people listening begin to quietly disengage, not because they dislike the person, but because the performance starts to feel like exactly that, a performance. Now there is another kind of confidence that behaves very differently, and it is this kind that I want to talk to you about. Because once you understand it, truly understand it, it will reshape the way you think about strength, influence, and what it actually means to be a man who commands respect. This second kind of confidence does not announce itself. It does not rush to fill every silence. It does not feel the need to prove anything to anyone. In fact, if you are not paying close attention, you might miss it entirely, because it lives in the spaces between words. It lives in the pauses. It lives in the way someone listens, fully, deeply, without already preparing their response before the other person has finished speaking. And here is the paradox that took me years to understand. This quiet confidence, this calm, unhurried, almost still presence, often carries more authority than the loudest voice in any room. Let me show you what I mean. Picture a dinner table, 6 or 7 people sitting together. The conversation is lively, ideas are flying, opinions are bouncing back and forth like a ping-pong ball that nobody wants to drop. Most of the people at that table are actively participating. They are jumping in the moment someone finishes a sentence. They are stacking their thoughts on top of each other. They are competing, maybe without even realizing it, for airtime. But then there is one person who is doing something different. They are sitting back, not disengaged, not bored, not scrolling through their phone under the table. They are listening, really listening. Their eyes are moving between speakers. They are absorbing not just the words, but the emotion behind the words, the dynamics between people, the subtle tensions, the unspoken things that float just beneath the surface of polite conversation. And then, after 10 minutes of near silence, they say something, one sentence, maybe two, and the entire table goes quiet. Not because they raise their voice, not because they slam their hand on the table, but because when this person speaks, their words carry a weight that the constant talkers simply cannot match. Why does this happen? The answer is rooted in one of the most fundamental principles of human psychology. Scarcity creates value. This is true for diamonds. It is true for rare experiences. And it is true for words. When someone speaks constantly, when every thought, every reaction, every half-formed idea gets thrown into the conversation, their words become background noise. The brain starts filtering them out the same way it filters out the sound of traffic or the hum of an air conditioner. It is not that the words are meaningless. It is that there are so many of them that the mind stops treating any individual one as important. But when someone speaks selectively, when they hold their words until they have something genuinely meaningful to contribute, those words land differently. They arrive with weight, with intention, with the sense that this person chose this moment to speak for a reason. And that choice, conscious or not, triggers something in the brains of everyone listening. Attention sharpens, resistance lowers, and the message penetrates deeper. I want to be vulnerable with you for a moment here, because this lesson did not come easily to me. There was a time, and I am not proud of this, but it is the truth, when I believed that silence was a weakness. In group settings, in meetings, in social situations, I felt this invisible pressure to contribute constantly, to prove that I was engaged, to show that I had ideas, to fill every gap in the conversation before someone else could, because what if they thought I had nothing to say? What if silence made me seem passive? What if not speaking meant being overlooked? And so I talked a lot. I jumped in quickly. I offered opinions before I had fully formed them. I responded to things before I had truly understood them. And sure, people listened sometimes. But looking back now, I realized something that stings a little. They were not listening because my words carried weight. They were listening because my words were loud and frequent. And there is a world of difference between those two things. The shift happened gradually. I started observing the people I genuinely admired, the ones I would describe as quietly powerful, and I noticed a pattern. They were almost never the ones talking the most. They were the ones listening the most. They absorbed the room before they contributed to it. And when they finally spoke, their words moved things, not because they were smarter than everyone else, but because they had given their words room to breathe. They had earned the silence that came before them, and that silence acted like a frame around a painting. It made everything inside it more visible, more meaningful, more worthy of attention. So here is the first piece of this puzzle. If you want your words to carry weight, you do not need to say more. You need to say less, but with greater intention. Now let me connect this to something that goes even deeper. Because quiet confidence is not just about how you speak. It is about how you respond to the world when the world pushes back. Let me ask you something. What happens inside you when someone disagrees with you? Not gently, not politely, but directly, bluntly, in front of other people. Maybe they challenge your idea. Maybe they question your judgment. Maybe they say something that feels dismissive or unfair. What is your first instinct? If you are like most people, the first instinct is to defend, to push back, to explain why you are right and why they are wrong. The heart rate increases, the jaw tightens. The words start forming before the other person has even finished their sentence. And in that moment, something very revealing happens. The disagreement stops being about the idea. It becomes about the ego. But men who have developed quiet confidence respond to disagreement very differently. And the difference is so subtle that you might miss it. If you blink, they listen fully, without interrupting, without preparing a counterattack in their head. They let the disagreement land. They sit with it. They turn it over mentally, the way you might turn over a stone you found on a beach, not with urgency, but with curiosity. And then, after a moment that feels just slightly longer than most people are comfortable with, they respond. Sometimes they agree. You know what? That is a fair point. I had not considered that. Sometimes they disagree. I hear what you are saying, but I still see it differently. Here is why. But either way, the response comes from a place of thought, not reaction, from assessment, not emotion, from a man who is secure enough in his own position that someone else's challenge does not feel like a threat. It feels like information. And that distinction, threat versus information, is one of the most important psychological shifts a man can make. Because when disagreement feels like a threat, every conversation becomes a battlefield. You are constantly defending territory, constantly proving your worth, constantly fighting to make sure no one takes anything away from you. But when disagreement becomes information, just data, just another perspective, just a different lens through which to see the same situation, something extraordinary happens. You relax, your shoulders drop, your voice stays steady, your mind stays clear, and the people around you feel that relaxation. They sense that you are not threatened, and that signal, "This man is not easily shaken," becomes one of the most magnetic qualities a human being can project. Now, there is another layer to this that I find absolutely fascinating, and it has to do with how men who have stopped seeking validation respond to praise. Because most people think insecurity only shows up in how someone handles criticism. But it shows up just as clearly, sometimes even more clearly, in how someone handles a compliment. Watch what happens the next time someone in your life receives praise. Many people immediately deflect. "Oh, it was nothing. I got lucky. It was really a team effort." Or they go the opposite direction and over-explain their achievement, as if the compliment has given them permission to finally talk about how great they are. But someone who is genuinely comfortable with their own value, they do something much simpler. They receive the compliment the way you might receive a glass of water when you are thirsty, gratefully, naturally, without making it a bigger moment than it needs to be. "Thank you, I appreciate that." And then they move on. No deflection, no over-explanation, no awkward dance of false modesty. Why does this matter? Because it reveals something about where that person's sense of identity actually lives. If a man's confidence depends on praise, then compliments become fuel, and the absence of compliments becomes a crisis. If a man's confidence depends on avoiding criticism, then every disagreement becomes a wound. But if a man's confidence is built on something internal, on principles, on self-knowledge, on a quiet certainty of knowing who he is and what he stands for, then both praise and criticism become simply feedback, information that can be considered, appreciated, and then released. This is what I mean when I say psychological freedom. The freedom to hear someone say, "You are amazing," without inflating. The freedom to hear someone say, "I think you are wrong," without crumbling. The freedom to exist in the space between other people's opinions without being controlled by either extreme. And that freedom, it is visible. People can feel it radiating from someone who has it. The same way you can feel warmth radiating from a fireplace even before you see the flames. It is a kind of steadiness, a kind of groundedness, a quality that makes people instinctively trust someone, not because of what they say, but because of what they do not need. They do not need constant reassurance. They do not need everyone in the room to agree with them. They do not need the last word in every argument. They do not need applause to feel valuable, and because they do not need these things, they carry themselves with a lightness that most people cannot fake. It is the lightness of a man who has stopped carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations and started carrying only his own truth. Now let me bring this to the single most practical tool in this entire audio, something so small, so simple, that most people dismiss it entirely, and yet it might be the most powerful habit a man can develop: the pause. I am not talking about dramatic theatrical silence. I am not talking about some manipulative technique where you stare at someone without blinking to assert dominance. I am talking about something far more human than that. The simple act of allowing a few seconds of space between what happens and how you respond. Think about how most people move through conversations. Someone says something, and the response comes almost immediately, like a reflex, like a tennis ball being hit back the instant it arrives. There is no gap, no processing, no moment of genuine consideration, just stimulus and response, over and over, faster and faster. But what happens when someone inserts a pause, even a small one, 3 seconds, 5 seconds, before responding? Everything changes. The temperature of the conversation drops. The urgency fades. The emotional charge that was building suddenly has nowhere to go, because the expected reaction did not arrive on schedule. And in that tiny pocket of silence, something powerful appears. Thought, genuine, clear, unhurried thought. The person who paused now has time to consider what was actually said, what was meant, what response would move this conversation forward instead of sideways. And when they finally do respond, their words come out clearer, calmer, more precise, more deliberate. They say what they mean instead of saying whatever their emotions pushed out first. I have watched this transform arguments into conversations. I have watched it turn potential confrontations into productive discussions. I have watched it completely shift the power dynamic in a room, not through force, not through volume, but through the simple, radical act of choosing to think before speaking. And here is the part that most people miss. The pause does not just change how others perceive you. It changes how you perceive yourself. Because every time you pause instead of reacting, you are training your own mind. You are building a new neural pathway. You are teaching yourself that you are not a slave to your impulses, that your emotions do not own you, that you have the power to choose your response in any situation, no matter how heated, no matter how uncomfortable, no matter how provoked you feel. Over time, this habit rewires your internal experience of the world. You become less reactive to small frustrations, less triggered by things that used to send you spiraling, less likely to say something in anger that you spend the next 3 days regretting, and more likely to move through difficult moments with the kind of grace that people remember long after the moment has passed. Think of the pause as a bridge. On one side is the old you, the reactive version, the one who lets every external event dictate his internal state. On the other side is the version of you that most people will never reach, the version who responds instead of reacting, the version who thinks before speaking, the version whose presence feels deliberate and grounded and impossible to rattle. That bridge is only a few seconds wide, but crossing it changes everything. The Man with a Compass: Why Direction Changes Everything and How to Become Unshakable. There is a quality that separates the men people admire from the men people simply tolerate. It is not wealth, it is not charisma, it is not even intelligence, although all of those things can certainly help. No, the quality I am talking about is far less glamorous and far more rare. It is direction. A man who has direction moves through the world like a ship with a compass. The seas may be rough, the storms may come, the fog may roll in so thick that he cannot see 10 feet ahead of him. But he keeps moving forward, not because he knows exactly where the destination is, not because he has every mile of the journey planned out in perfect detail, but because he knows which way is north. He knows what he is building. He knows what matters. And that knowledge, that quiet, internal certainty, changes absolutely everything about how he shows up in the world. Now compare that with a man who has no direction. And please hear me when I say this. I am not judging that man. I have been that man. Many of us have. A man without direction is not lazy. He is not stupid. He is not broken. He is simply unanchored. And when you are unanchored, life does not feel like a journey. It feels like a pinball machine. You bounce from one thing to the next. Messages arrive, and you respond immediately, not because they are important, but because you have nothing more important pulling your attention. Opportunities appear, and you chase them all, not because they align with something meaningful, but because any direction feels better than no direction. People offer opinions about what you should do with your life, and you listen to all of them, not because they are right, but because you do not yet have a strong enough voice of your own to drown them out. This is not a comfortable thing to admit, but I believe honesty is the foundation of real growth, and the honest truth is that without direction, a man's life becomes reactive. He wakes up every morning responding to whatever the world throws at him. His days are busy but hollow. His energy is scattered across a dozen different things, none of which are moving him toward anything that truly matters. And the worst part, he can feel it. Deep down, beneath the busyness and the distractions and the noise, there is a quiet voice whispering something he does not want to hear. You are moving, but you are not going anywhere. I remember that feeling, and I remember exactly when it started to change. It did not begin with some grand revelation or a life-altering event. It began with a single question that I asked myself one morning while sitting alone in a park, watching the pigeons fight over breadcrumbs and thinking that their struggle felt uncomfortably familiar. The question was this: what am I actually building? 4 words. That is all it took. But those 4 words cracked something open inside me. Because when I tried to answer, honestly, without the usual excuses and deflections, I realized that I did not have an answer. I was busy. I was productive. I was doing things. But I was not building anything. I was just moving. And movement without direction is just exhaustion with extra steps. That question became a turning point. Not because it gave me an instant answer, but because it forced me to stop pretending that busyness was the same thing as purpose. It forced me to sit with the discomfort of not knowing, and then to start slowly, clumsily, imperfectly, figuring it out. And here is what I discovered along the way. Direction does not require a detailed 5-year plan. It does not require knowing exactly where you will end up. Life is far too unpredictable for that kind of certainty, and anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. What direction does require is something much simpler and much harder at the same time. It requires clarity about what matters to you, not what matters to your parents, not what matters to society, not what the internet tells you should matter, what matters to you, deep down, in the spaces where no one else can see. When a man finds even a fragment of that clarity, his behavior begins to change in ways that are immediately noticeable. Even if he cannot explain them himself, his decisions become faster because he now has a filter. Every opportunity, every request, every invitation gets measured against a simple question. Does this move me toward what I am building, or does it pull me away from it? Some things pass through the filter, many do not. And because of that, his time becomes more focused. His energy becomes more concentrated. His days begin to feel less like chaos and more like construction. And people notice. They always notice. Because a man with direction carries himself differently. His conversations have a certain weight to them, not heaviness. Weight. The kind of weight that comes from speaking about things you actually care about, rather than filling airtime with whatever topic happens to float past. He does not gossip as much. He does not complain as much. He does not drift into conversations about other people's lives because his own life has become interesting enough to hold his full attention. There is another fascinating thing that happens when a man develops direction. His confidence changes, and it changes in a way that has nothing to do with personality. Most people believe confidence is something you are born with. Some people have it. Some people do not. And while personality certainly plays a role, I have come to believe that the deepest form of confidence does not come from personality at all. It comes from alignment. When your actions are aligned with something you genuinely believe in, when the way you spend your time matches what you say matters to you, confidence appears almost automatically. Not the loud, performative kind, the quiet, unshakable kind. The kind that does not need to announce itself because it is not built on applause. It is built on alignment. Think of it this way. Imagine you are building a house. Every day you lay 1 more brick. Some days you lay 10. Some days you barely manage 1. But every single brick is placed deliberately. Every brick is part of a plan. And after months and years of this slow, steady work, you look up and realize that you have built something real, something solid, something that belongs to you because you built it with your own hands. Now, imagine someone walks up to that house and says, "I do not like your house." How much does that opinion shake you? Very little, because you know what went into building it. You know the sacrifices. You know the early mornings and the late nights. You know every brick by name. Their opinion is just that, an opinion. It does not add a brick, and it does not remove one. That is what direction does for a man's confidence. It gives him something that external opinions cannot touch, something that does not inflate when someone praises him and does not collapse when someone criticizes him. A foundation. And once that foundation exists, the man standing on it becomes extraordinarily difficult to shake. This brings us to something I have been building toward throughout this entire audio, the concept of becoming unshakable. And I want to be careful with this word, because I do not mean it the way most people might interpret it. Becoming unshakable does not mean becoming invincible. It does not mean never feeling doubt, never experiencing fear, never having moments where you question everything. Those moments will always exist. They are part of being human. What unshakable means is something more nuanced than that. It means developing an internal structure, a psychological architecture that is strong enough to absorb the shocks of life without collapsing. Think about a tree in a hurricane. The trees that survive are not the ones that refuse to bend. Those are the ones that snap. The trees that survive are the ones with deep roots. They bend, they sway. The wind tears leaves from their branches and pushes them sideways until it seems impossible that they will stay standing. But they do, because underneath the chaos, beneath the surface where no one can see, those roots are holding firm, gripping the earth, refusing to let go. That is what it means to be unshakable, not rigid, not hard, not cold, rooted, a man who can bend without breaking, a man who can feel the storm without being destroyed by it, a man who can experience doubt without being consumed by it, face criticism without being defined by it, and encounter failure without being stopped by it. Now let me bring together everything we have explored, because these ideas are not separate principles. They are threads of the same rope, and when you weave them together, something extraordinary begins to take shape. The man who stops chasing approval discovers that his decisions finally belong to him. The man who learns to remain calm under pressure discovers that his emotions no longer control his behavior. The man who sets boundaries discovers that his time and energy become sacred instead of scattered. The man who protects his availability discovers that his presence begins to carry real weight. The man who develops quiet confidence discovers that he no longer needs the world to validate what he already knows about himself. The man who masters the pause discovers that his reactions become choices, and choices create power. And the man who finds direction discovers that his entire life begins to organize itself around something meaningful. Individually, each of these shifts is powerful. Together, they create something that is genuinely transformative, internal stability. And internal stability is the one thing that changes everything. A man with internal stability does not feel the need to win every argument. He does not feel threatened by someone else's success. He does not collapse when plans fall apart. He does not panic when the future becomes uncertain. He does not define himself by the opinions of people who do not know his full story. And he does not waste his energy trying to control things that were never his to control in the first place. Instead, he focuses on the only thing that has ever truly been within his power: how he shows up, how he responds, how he carries himself, how he treats the people around him, how he spends the irreplaceable hours of his one and only life. And when a man starts living from that place, that grounded, intentional, deeply rooted place, the world begins to respond differently, not because he demanded it, not because he performed it, but because authenticity is magnetic. Purpose is magnetic. And a man who knows who he is, where he is going, and what he stands for radiates something that no amount of pretending can replicate. I want to leave you with something, not advice exactly, more like an invitation. As you walk away from this audio, I am not going to tell you to go out and impress the world. I am not going to tell you to hustle harder or grind longer or perform better than everyone around you. In fact, I am going to suggest the opposite. Stop trying to prove yourself to rooms full of people who are too busy trying to prove themselves to notice. Stop rearranging your life to keep everyone else comfortable while your own foundation crumbles underneath you. Stop measuring your value by how many people approve of you, and start measuring it by how honestly you are living according to your own principles. Because here is the truth that very few people will ever tell you, but that every man eventually learns the hard way. The world does not respect the man who chases respect. The world respects the man who respects himself, and then simply gets to work, not loudly, not dramatically, not with speeches or performances or desperate attempts to be seen, quietly, steadily, brick by brick, day by day, decision by decision, with a calm heart and a clear mind and a compass that points toward something only he fully understands. That is the man the world cannot easily shake, not because he is stronger than everyone else, but because he is no longer fighting everyone else. He is building something, and a man who is busy building rarely has time to beg. So build. Protect your time. Guard your energy. Speak with intention. Pause before reacting. Set boundaries without apology. Find your direction and follow it. Even when the path is dark, even when the progress is slow, even when no one is watching. Because one day you will look up from the work and realize something remarkable. The respect you spent years chasing, it has been standing beside you for a while now, quietly, patiently, waiting for you to stop running long enough to notice that it was already there. It was always there. You just had to become the man who deserved it, not in the eyes of the world, in your own